What happens after the best year that your company's ever had? First of all, congratulations. But most people never think about what happens when you have a great year. Most people are so focused on hitting milestones that they don't really stop to think about what happens next. So if your company's had a huge year, this moment right now is what decides whether or not that success will stick and you can sustain it, or if everything you work for is going to crash and fall apart. Random growth can take you so far, but only planned and structured growth can keep you there. In this video, I want to show you how to protect success so that it lasts, and how you can avoid the mistakes that cause many businesses to fail after attaining or hitting a new height. So a pretty common scenario when companies come to me is they'll describe that they had years that they kind of went along. Let's say this represents their revenues over the course of however many years. And then they have this year where they spike in growth. And then they crashed again, and they're kind of right here. So they come and talk to me when they're down in this space right about here. So let's say they've been typically doing about $10 million a year in revenue. They jump and they spike and they have this maybe $30 million year. You know, they just somehow killed it. Something happened, or 20 million or whatever number you want to pick, some big number for them. And then they crash afterwards. And this happens all of the time. I have two clients that experienced this coming from about from about 6 to 7 million. And they jumped to 12 to 14 million. I have clients that we're at about 20 million that jumped to 40, and then they crashed, and then they crashed. I have a client right now that was at 50 that jumped to 100 million and then crashed. And so this is a common, very common dynamic. But the good news is that it's not inevitable. And so you can avoid this crash. You just have to pay attention, and you have to be aware of what happens. And basically what happens is this, is somebody did something. You know, there's either kind of a fluke event where a bunch of business comes in, or more often the business owner or executive or leader will start winning a bunch of new work. They'll decide, hey, let's go for it. And they'll go for it big, and they often, will double or more in size. But it puts stress on the systems. You're putting load in the system. Many years ago, I decided I wanted to do an indoor garden. And because I'm lazy, I decided I wanted to be set up on an indoor irrigation system. So I had this little garden laid out, and I had this little irrigation lines laid out so that I could hook it up to water, and it was set on a timer, and it would just automatically turn on for so long during the day, and I could set about how much water came out of the little nozzles all over the garden. What I discovered is when you have a system like that has many different little nodes and connections on it, you have many, many little points of failure in the system. And I was constantly finding I was flooding the room, or there was problems with the garden. Anyways, it did not work. Gardening in my world belongs outside, and so it does not belong inside. For context, I live in Alaska, and I was trying to figure out a way to do like a kitchen garden year-round, and I'm not the engineer to do that. Because by putting water and having constant strain on a system, it puts stress on it, and these points of failure are going to be challenged. And so when you grow, when you have significant growth, whatever that means for you, this could be revenue growth, it could be just number of customers, it could be growth in terms of geography, it could be new lines of services or product that you're, anything that's more complicated, it stresses your systems. Now, the good news is that becomes an opportunity for you to begin to recognize, where do our systems need to be strengthened? But here's what happens most of the time. When I meet the folks that are on this side here, I'll say, okay, great. Do you want to get back to this point? Do you want to get back up here again and then take off? Now that you know you can do it, do you want to learn how to get to there and sustain and maintain that growth? And what they will almost always say is, no, this was awful. And it's almost like some kind of post-traumatic stress reaction to it. This was awful. This was too stressful. This was too hard. I almost lost my marriage over this. I lost my health over this. This was a horrible experience. Please never get us back here. I don't really listen to that well, because I like this, but I like sustaining this. But I have to kind of catch where they're at right now, because this emotion is real. And so a lot of the work I have to do is around confidence building at this space. And these clients that I listed out here earlier are all on this trajectory, or have already exceeded their past, high watermark years. So it's absolutely possible that you can do it, but you have to do some things first. And that's what I want to introduce here. One of the things that I encourage that you do, I guess I can erase all of this, is that when you've gone through a really hard push, and for most, I would say most scaling companies, this hard push is going to be a 1 to 3 year push where there's a lot of growth. There's usually a really intensive push for a period of time, and then that's about all that most companies can sustain. And then there's typically a 1 to 2 year period of what I call consolidation. During that time period, you have a chance to go back and review the systems that were weak. You just realize this wasn't enough. We needed more staffing. We needed better software. We needed to have better policies and procedures. We needed whatever the things were. And you can go back and you can look at that. I get this word in consolidation. This comes from my fitness background, from my strength and conditioning background, which is, this is a real similar pattern. If you're trying to grow, let's say you're strength training, and you're trying to grow and you're adding weight, and you go through what's typically, maybe a 4 to 6 week period of really pushing yourself hard, you're going to want to take a 1 to 2 week period to let your body consolidate what's happened. You've been stressing your body, and you're going to want to give yourself a week or two, not to quit, but you dramatically lighten the load. You might do some cross training or some other things, or you just, cut your weights in half, and you allow your body to figure out, what did you just do to me? And how do I need to adapt? This is your body thinking. And so what changes are needed, not just to your muscles, but to also your connective tissue and also to your nervous system, so that you can go back and pursue more growth. If you don't make room for this consolidation phase, you will tip over. You are going to hurt something, something's going to blow apart, and you will not be able to sustain it. If you don't expect that you're going to need to have a consolidation phase, that you're going to grow, hit this point where you consolidate, grow again, hit a point where you consolidate, and keep moving up, if you don't plan for that, then a lot of times you put all of your energy into growing, then you peter out, you got no energy left, and then you crash. What you want to do instead is plan when you've got the capacity to keep growing, stop before the end and consolidate there. So even though you could keep growing a little bit more, don't put all of your energy in it. So the concept from fitness is, you want to stop when you're working out. You want to stop when you still got a good 1 or 2 reps left in the tank. You don't always, there's times where it's good to work to failure and to fatigue. There's an appropriate place for doing that within an appropriate structure. But most of the time, that overtaxes the body and sets you up for larger problems. It's the similar kind of a concept in business. You want to leave 1 or 2 reps in the tank. You could go out and get another project. You could go out and gain another 10% in clients. You could do those things, but you're going to leave that and you're going to take this time to consolidate. That's the concept right there. So if you have a solid strategy that guides all of this, which you should, and I'm going to describe some elements that should be incorporated into your strategy here in a little bit. If you have a solid strategy that guides this, that will help you know, okay, we need to stop now. We feel like we could keep bringing in business, but we're recognizing we're starting to put too much strain on the system. This doesn't mean we quit. It doesn't mean that we go back down. It means that we consolidate for a year or so. We start figuring out what were the lessons learned, what went well, what didn't go well, and based off of where we want to go next, how do we need to structure? That was a question mark. Where do we want to go next? What structure do we need to have? What systems do we need to have? What do we need to have in place so that we can carry that? What you should experience for each of your growth jumps is each one should be smarter feeling than the last one. You should have a better each one's going to be different. They're not going to be the same story, but you should have a better understanding of how to navigate the growth experience as you go. And so that's the basic concept there. So I know that saying focusing on strategy as opposed to getting caught up in urgency sounds great on paper. But if you're running a company, you know how hard it can be to actually do that. Strategy rarely beats urgency unless it's built into your day by default. That's why I've built some practical advice for CEOs who don't want to build just random growth, but they want to build something on purpose that'll last. If you go to my website, christianmuntean.com, I have lots of resources there that will help you be structured in your pursuit of growth. I encourage you to look at it now. The trick or the challenge that many companies or many owners or leaders fall into is really getting caught up in the excitement and the urgency of things. And they lose track of, if we bring in this much work, this is what it's going to take to fulfill that. So you want to be able to think about that in advance. And that's not a difficult exercise. You should be able to know if we add 20% or 50% or 100% of new customers, or we double our revenues, what will it take to handle that, and can we do that? It's a relatively simple thought experiment. Probably doesn't take more than a half an hour, maybe an hour, to really think through that. Most people understand, here's what it'll take. Some of the fine-grained details, maybe not, but for thought experiment purposes, for general strategy laying purposes, it's not a hard thing to figure out. So you want to think, if we want to grow, because growth always looks like stairs, it doesn't have this nice slope to it, and we want to make this push, when should we plan to consolidate? Again, you want to think it's probably your growth is going to go for 1 to 3 years. It's not going to be perpetual. There's going to have to be a point where you either rest or you will crash, and so you want to plan for, what will this look like? What will that period look like? There's 4 areas where there's 4 buckets or 4 categories that you will find yourself being stressed in when you grow. And if you learn to try to anticipate them, you'll never be able to anticipate everything, because it's just a different vantage point and experience. And until you've been there, you just don't know what the view is. That being said, you can do the best that you can to try to anticipate, and you'll be far better off than those who just wing it and try to figure it out. And so those major buckets have to do with mindset. Specifically, if you've been in the business for, you've been running your business, most, especially small businesses, they're so busy just trying to survive, that's what they've gotten really good at. They've gotten really good at surviving. They know how to make it work when there's not a whole lot of resources, not a whole lot of money, when it's really hard to build your team, when you can't always get the best or the ideal of anything, but you're making it work. So there's a lot of companies that get good at that. And then when you get past needing to survive and you get to a place where, I'm borrowing this from a mentor of mine, Alan Weiss. You get to this level, this framework that I'm sharing here. When you get past surviving and you get to where you're alive now, like, you don't have to worry about living. You're now just managing being alive. And that's the next phase that a lot of people get to. And then some people get really good at that. You'll meet companies that have been around for 10 years, 20 years, and they're very good at just being alive. They've figured it out. They've cracked the code. And they've been cruising along at, whatever size for a long time, and they feel like, I've got it. And maybe that's good enough. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people really want to get to a point of arriving, and the differentiator between alive and arrive would be, if you've now become a name in your industry, you're now a go-to resource in your community, for example. You're now, starting to be recognized for one of the players or one of the better folks. You're not just making it in business, not able to just, survive the whole thing and be alive, but now you've arrived, you're on the scene. And the next step after that is to be able to thrive. And at this point, you're actually at a very different place where you're starting to think about changing your industry, shaping your industry. You're able to move into legacy. You're able to move into real thought leadership, forming best practices, any of those kinds of levels in your space. Whatever your level of ambition is, there's no obligation to work your way from surviving to thriving, although many people, would like to get out of the survive level. Point being is, as you move up, you will naturally find yourself wherever your baseline is. For most people, it's going to be here or here. Wherever your baseline is, if you're starting to get to a point now where in your industry, being a $20 million or $50 million or $100 million company is starting to bump you up into one of these levels, but your habits, your survival patterns are here, they will tend to suck you back and they'll draw you back down. So that's one of the things that you want to track is, are there habits or mindsets or perspectives that you have that are sucking you back into a direction that you used to be in, you don't want to be there anymore, you thought you could get out of it, and you find yourself back there. A lot of times it's because of how leaders think. There's a lot more to say about that, about how you change it. I've talked about that in other videos, but this is just something I want to put you on your radar, that you will notice, many people will notice at least, that as you move up, you're going to notice like, oh, that part was hard. Like I found myself reacting in ways that really aren't conducive to growing or maintaining this level of success. And part of this kind of was feeling a little more attractive, a little more familiar, and I kind of wanted to go back to that. So you just want to be aware of that. The other part is structure and systems. You're going to find out right away whether your SOPs or PNPs or playbook or whatever you call it, you're going to find out whether or not it actually is still helpful, or whether you start to outgrow portions of it, or you just haven't written elements of it. You're going to discover those things. You're going to find out, are your software structures that you have in place, are they robust enough to handle the growth that where you're going? And on and on. There's all kinds of structure, facility structure, any of those kinds of things. It'll test that, and you'll have an opportunity to see like, oh, I didn't even think about that. But when you grow, you need more space to do things. And so next time when we grow, we're going to have to plan for that in advance. The third thing is team. This, should be obvious, but it seems to catch many, many people by surprise, that if you're going to double your business, you might need more people to help out. That's not always the case. There's some industries that can double without adding people, but most can't. Most have to grow their team if they're going to grow their business. And so if you can anticipate in advance, which is not a difficult exercise, I have plenty of other content on that. If you're going to grow your team out, you should be able to anticipate, if you're right here right now and you're planning this move, you should be able to figure out what kind of a team do we need at that level. If this is $10 million version U, and this is going to be $20 million version U, you should be able to figure out, okay, $20 million of business is going to look like this. To provide that business and support the company, we're going to need a team that looks like that. And you can kind of map it out. It's not that hard. And so you want to be able to think through this. Now, where these things tend to break down is due to a lack of clarity regarding roles and responsibilities. A lot of times a new team is brought in and they're just thrown into new roles that have not been well defined. And this creates ambiguity, it creates conflict, you lose tons of time and effort, and it leaves lots of room for mistakes. It's one of the primary areas that creates stress and growth, is growing a team without really defining for people, here's what you do. Again, it's one of those things that probably seems super obvious as I'm explaining it right now, but I would say, 4 out of 5 companies that are pursuing growth will not even think about it. They'll just start throwing people into the mix and, hope they figure it out. And so you can figure it out in advance without a whole lot of effort. And I encourage you to do that. I have a specific tool around that. If you go to my website, christianmontine.com, and you look up under succession, there's a resource around staff planning or strategic staffing. And it's lumped under the succession toolkit, succession 360 toolkit, but it's also a tool that you can use for planning staff growth. The last piece where you start to notice problems is in culture. When you're a small company, the owner or the leader of the company doesn't really have to talk about culture, doesn't even know to talk about culture, because that's just how I do business. But as you start to grow, you get a couple of dozen people working for you, you get 4 or 5 dozen people working for you. You start to get to a point where not everybody's right with you all the time. And in fact, you can't hire people who always think exactly like you, because you need more people than you can get. You need them too fast to be able to do all that screening. And so you're bringing in people that are at different levels of just personal growth and maturity. They have different value sets, etc. And so you want to begin to define and figure out, how do we write the recipe book for our culture? How do we define our values, which is how we make decisions and how we relate, how we behave? That's essentially what values tell you. And then how do we help define what those values look like in terms of how we do our sales process, in terms of how we recruit and onboard people, in terms of how we make management decisions, in terms of how we design or deliver products or services. You want to begin to codify that or write the recipes for that, so that somebody new coming into your company who doesn't know you personally can actually look at the book and say, oh, okay, this is how this company works and it all makes sense. If you do these 4 things, this is where you're going to find the breakdowns most of the time. It's in one or more of these areas, which is fine. It's okay to stress the system as you grow, as long as you have this planned consolidation period where you go back and you realize, oh, we need to improve before we move more growth. We need to improve our P&Ps. We need to improve that, our policies and procedures. Or, wow, I'm recognizing I'm getting spooked with growth and all this activity. Maybe I need to talk to somebody. Maybe I need to talk to a coach or a counselor or just some good peers that can help me think through what's it like to be successful at this level and to have this kind of, size that I'm managing. Whatever the area is, our culture, we're bringing in people. And one of the areas where you'll start to see problems here is you will find teams that are acting in ways that feel contradictory to your values. And that's because they weren't brought in alignment with the culture or taught to do that. Or you start to find silos emerging within your teams. Those are 2 very common ways that you'll start to see problems in that space. Or you don't have the people you need when you need them. Hopefully that helps. And so again, growth is fun. I think it's great. I love walking companies from 10 million to 50 million to 100 million. I think that's a fun process. It doesn't have to take super long or it doesn't have to take forever, but you do have to plan these periods where you consolidate and grow and you improve things along the way. It's not just about doing more business. And I think that maybe that's the summary of this video. Most people think growth is about more sales, more business, and that's part of it, but you have to be able to metabolize all of it. You have to be able to handle it and carry all of it gracefully. And so these are the 4 things that you'll probably need to look at to make that happen. So now you know how to avoid the mistakes that cause many businesses to fail after significant growth, and how you can keep your system strong enough to handle success. But growth on its own isn't enough. It's also vital to understand the value of your company, not just top-line revenues. In the next video, I'll walk you through how to determine that and how to strengthen the value of your business.